let's talk about all the things Donald Trump has done since the Orlando shooting. And they're relevant because it really ties into the way America approaches a lot of things, which is really ridiculous and really asinine. First of all, this entire thing about Orlando, the Pulse nightclub and shooting, on a national level, in many ways, it has been whitewashed from being about an explicit, express attack on the LGBTQ community to being a question of what are we going to call Islamic terrorism? Right. What words are we going to use? How are we going to describe it? And Donald Trump is running around the country with all of this bravado about him being right about how we're going to characterize and describe or call this act, which minimizes and reduces. We talked about this last night, but we got to talk about it again. It minimizes and reduces all of the and not complicated, but layers, just layers upon layers of things that drove and motivated this guy. We want to whitewash it and minimize it and reduce it to being about Islamic terrorism. And this is not just something Donald Trump is doing. This is something Hillary Clinton has done also. And she is allowing Donald Trump. I said all this yesterday, and I will congratulate myself on being first to many of these narratives, because we said it last night. As soon as I found out that this young man, this murderer, had visited and frequented the Pulse nightclub, you automatically know that he is a person that was struggling with his identity and to a certain extent hated himself. And then we can add the layer on top of it that the reason he hated himself probably was because of his religion. And probably because of how his father treated him. And you can see all these things started to unravel. So it's not just a guy who went online and got radicalized by ISIS and all of a sudden turned from a normal, stable guy who was suddenly captured by this ridiculous ideology that is a cancer and has taken over the United States, and he got radicalized and he came and did this terrible deed. No. The story is far more complex, not complicated, but complex, with multiple layers. But Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton have both reduced this to being about radical Islam. And so what I'm saying about Donald Trump really does apply to Hillary Clinton, too, because even though Donald Trump expressed this with this narcissistic bravado that he expresses everything. I mean, shit, he can't say good morning without saying it in a narcissistic way. It doesn't absolve Hillary Clinton from the fact that she, too, has also whitewashed and minimized and reduced this down to being about radical Islam versus all of the complex factors that were driving this man to this moment of expressing this deep-seated hatred that he had for himself, that he had for the LGBTQ community, and that he had for America. It's all the above with this guy. And Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump, they have turn this into an opportunity to make this a nationalistic rallying point. Hillary Clinton said yesterday that this should be a 9/12 moment, like the day after 9/11, when there was no political animosity and everyone was on one accord and we came together in unity. And little did she did not go further and say what happened because of that unity on 9/12. Because of that unity on 9/12, we ended up invading the wrong country. And we're stuck in wars not a generation, but a decade later, because of that unification that took place after 9/11 on 9/12. So Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump have both made this about radical Islam, which gets me back to the point. Sorry, went off topic. The point of what I wanted to say was this. Donald Trump has been able to set the narrative with this shooting. And that's because Hillary Clinton, and we'll talk about President Obama in a minute, but particularly Hillary Clinton was not brave enough or bold enough to actually wait to get just a little bit more information before having to present herself as bold and strong. Because if anyone, and this is, And actually, let's go beyond the two candidates. Let's go to the media. I'm listening to NPR, and I'm going to stop listening to NPR because NPR is doing two things. They are doing disaster massacre porn type reporting, and they are beating the drums of nationalism and war because whenever they mention the sexuality of the killer, they always mention it as an aside, and they never focus on it as a possible motive. They only focus on him being radicalized online. And to me, anyone who is reducing this to being a guy who was simply radicalized online is intentionally missing the layers that he existed in. And again, it's not in any attempt to humanize this guy, right? I have no need to humanize him. But for us to understand the tragedy, for us to understand the massacre and what really drove him, and more importantly, for us not to push ourselves into another quagmire of 10 years because we are responding to the wrong information instead of waiting patiently to find out exactly all of the factors at play here. Instead of doing that, we want to rally behind a 9/12 spirit. Back to Donald Trump. Donald Trump has set the tone. Donald Trump has set the tone, and Hillary Clinton is now playing catch up so that Donald Trump doesn't look stronger than her. And so now we've gone with the term radical Islam. That's the term that Hillary Clinton, and she tried to play it off as something uniquely different by saying radical Islamism, but it's essentially radical Islam. Right. That's what she said. And this is something now, to be sure, I don't have any problem with calling it radical Islam because who cares? I do believe our Muslim brothers and sisters, their community, they are strong enough to handle somebody trying to identify the problem of radicalized teens carrying out terrorism. I'm sure they have broad enough shoulders in the Muslim community to handle the term radical Islam. So I personally don't care about it. But the reality of it is, what in the world does calling it radical Islam do any differently than all of the Hellfire drone missiles that we're dropping on ISIS right now? Calling it radical, I call it insane Islamists of America. I don't care what you call it. It does not change the strategy of what we're doing. We should be critiquing the strategy of what we're doing instead of allowing the Republican Party to once again set the parameters of our debate. The entire conversation has become about who's going to say radical Islam. Apparently, I don't have my headphones on right tonight, so I'm going to be trying to adjust these all night. We have allowed Donald Trump and the Republican Party to set the parameters of the debate around this. And because we've allowed them to set the parameters, we have erased the LGBTQ community. And we have erased the fact that this man hated himself, had a level of self-hatred because of his sexuality or his inability to embrace his sexuality and unleash that self-hatred on an entire club of people. Not to mention the fact that he had mental illness that his wife mentioned. He was already a domestic abuser. He was already a violent person. He already had a confluence of shitstorm personality traits that he should never have been able to get. Maybe we need psychological evaluations before you can get a gun. Because this dude most assuredly would not have passed a psychological eval. So we have completely erased mental health issues. We've erased the LGBTQ community. We've erased his self-hatred that came as a part of his religion, his self-hatred that came as a part of America, right? Not just Islam, but America. We have a culture that is homophobic. You do not have to go to Islam to find homophobia. You can find homophobia just by turning on the news. Right. So every bit of nuance, we've erased it. And the entire damn conversation has become about, what are you going to call it? You're going to call it radical Islam or not? If you don't know how to call it radical Islam, how are you going to ever beat it? Well, we're going to beat it apparently they think the way to beat it is by dropping a shit's load of drone missiles on ISIS every day. I mean, if you think our missile attacks are going to be better by calling it radical Islam, if you think that's going to put a little oomph on that drone strike, then maybe you have some voodoo that we don't understand. Maybe you have some militaristic voodoo that we just don't understand, and we need to just rub those missiles and say radical Islam, radical Islam, radical Islam, and then drop them. Maybe is that what you're thinking? And the most disturbing part about this is we have allowed a Neanderthal buffoon, and that's an insult to Neanderthals. We have allowed a cretin sludge, orange sludge, slime of the earth maniac and his 7 dwarfs of a GOP to define the parameters of a very serious conversation. We've allowed them to set the window by which we're going to have this conversation. And Hillary Clinton and the rest of the Get Along gang are happily acquiescing and complying because they need to be bold and they need to show strength. All right. So this story is about so much more than radical Islam, but I don't care what you call it. Changing the name of what we call it has absolutely zero to do with our successful or our unsuccessful attempts to crush it. You're going to have some people, in the political debate, some people think we're doing a good job with ISIS. Some people think we're doing a piss poor job. I am of the opinion that it doesn't matter what kind of job we're doing. Changing the name and debating of whether or not we're going to call it radical Islam is not going to have 1 cent iota of an impact on how effective or how ineffective our campaigns are against ISIS. And why, for the love of all sanity, do we keep allowing buffoons to define the narrative? Part of me thinks that Hillary Clinton and the DNC know exactly what they're doing. But on days like today, I think they are clueless as to how to handle someone like Donald Trump and the Republican Party. When you have a buffoon, it's so easy to get as Donald Trump. I just think that they don't know how to handle him. Instead, they're running up behind him like scared. Let me choose my words very precisely here, because somebody will go back and find this footage and bring it back up and say I was being X, Y, or Z. They're afraid and they're reactionary and they are responding to his cues instead of dictating this is what our conversation is going to be about.